Morning. Yeah, like Matt said, last night I was with the young adults. It was so cool. Saturday night, young 20-somethings here, right, at church. And it reminded me, I told them it reminded me of 1977 when I first became a Christian. I was going to Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa. And every Saturday night, they had a concert. Actually, my first Christian concert I saw there, and it was all 20-somethings going there. And we had this thing that we did. There was this guy, Larry Norman, and he wrote this song, One Way. And it was a big hit in the 70s. And One Way to Heaven. And so when you would greet another Christian, you'd go, "Hey, man, how you doing?" Instead of this, you go this, "One way." And if you saw somebody on the freeway with a fish on their car, you go this, and everybody knew it. Everybody knew it. That one crazy song. So this morning, I'd like to talk about what is going to be our spiritual footprint in life. Last week, Pastor Gene was talking about how we praise in restaurants with the service. It's such a great thing. I was out to lunch with him a couple of years ago, and he said, "Well, this is what I do." And so we prayed with the server. My wife and I have been doing that all the time now for 2 years. And let me tell you something. It's amazing. We have one restaurant we go to. When the waitress sees us, she's like, "Oh, we're going to pray tonight. We're going to get prayers tonight." And another time we went and we prayed with this waitress, and she left, and the other waitresses come out and said, "You don't know how you blew her away. She's been going through some tough times. She's in the kitchen now crying that God cares for her." Another time, a guy said, "No, I'm all right. You don't need to pray for me. I'm good." We said, "Oh, okay, And then he came back and he said, "You didn't pray yet, did you?" I changed my mind. I do have something I want you to pray for me for. So the thing is, are you willing to step out of your comfort zone for Christ's sake? We rise and fall to the level of our conversations. Maya Angelou, the famous poet, once wrote, "People may forget what you say, and people may forget what you do, but no one will ever forget how you made them feel." How do people feel when you're around them? Are they happy to see you coming, or are they glad to see you go? There's a great song by John Gorka called "The Gypsy Life," and he says, it's easier for people to love you when they know you're leaving soon. Have you ever thought about your lasting effect on people when you leave? Now, I recently went to the funeral of one of my wife's childhood friends. Her name was Anne. I didn't know Anne very well, but I was struck by the consistent message of what people said was experiencing Anne. From the eulogy in the church to the luncheon afterwards, one message was clear: Anne made you feel special. In the eulogy, her friend Rocco told about how Anne showed up in Las Vegas unannounced to help with his wife's challenging pregnancy. She just showed up. And then at the luncheon later, I was sitting with a guy from Maryland who was originally from New Jersey, and he told me that he had lost his job and he was so depressed and he was going through such a terrible time, and he hadn't seen Anne in a long time, and that Anne got wind of it up here in New Jersey, and she called a bakery by him. She had remembered this guy's favorite cake, and she ordered the cake and had it delivered to his house. And he said the message was clear: no matter what difficulty you're going through, you're loved here and we care, and here's a cake to cheer you up. And it cheered him up. Now, scientists have this measurement for us, right? It's called the carbon footprint. Anybody ever hear of this? The carbon footprint. That's a way to measure the environmental impact of our lifestyles. It's supposed to represent what amount of greenhouse gas emissions our lives create, how we personally affect the environment when we're here and then we leave. I think we must be more concerned with our spiritual imprint, though. how we personally affect the environment of God's kingdom here on earth. So we don't realize how big our lives are, positively and negatively. The way we think, the way we feel, and the way we behave touches people. For generations, it could be. Now, in contrast to Ann's funeral, when my dad died, I really didn't feel anything. We never really had a relationship. I wasn't sad at all, and I felt, well, that's over. And that bothered me. That bothered me because you should be sad when your dad dies. Now, I did learn a lot from my dad, and a lot of who I am today I got from my dad, but we never had a relationship. I got to tell you something, in all the years, we never had a serious conversation at all. And that is a tragedy. The object of this class, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, is that we make people around us feel loved and respected because we're emotional adults. They can experience us as an emotional adult or an emotional child, right? A child who needs to be taken care of or complains or manipulates people. But emotional adults don't have a need to people please, and they're not threatened by criticism. Emotional adults are capable of setting healthy boundaries without feeling guilty. To be able to say, you can't talk to me like that, or I don't want to do that. No, I'm not doing that, and not feel guilty about it. The focus of the two classes, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality and Emotionally Healthy Relationships, is to teach us how to love well. That's basically it, to teach us how to love well. Jesus said in Matthew 22 that the two greatest commandments are love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. He said this is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments: loving God and loving others. Those who are emotionally healthy adults leave a lasting impression on people's souls by loving them well. People are happy to see them come. They have a keen sense of self-awareness. I've grown in this. I know the things that trigger me. They're attuned to their inner signals. They have faced their shadow. So people feel secure around them, not threatened. They recognize how their emotions affect them and their relationships, and they're able to set healthy boundaries. Emotionally healthy adults have a heightened sense of self-confidence. People enjoy their company. They are elite people who are emotional adults. They enjoy feeling stable, peaceful, and financially secure. They don't create chaos. Now, that's the picture of an emotional adult. Now, I've already covered the symptoms of emotionally unhealthy people in the past couple of months. First one is using God to run from God, ignoring anger, sadness, and fear, dying to the wrong things, denying the impact of the past on the present, dividing life into secular and sacred compartments, looking for God instead of doing for God instead of being with God, and then spiritualizing away conflict. That's where we left last month. And today, I'll cover the last three symptoms. That's covering over brokenness, weakness, and failure, living without limits, and judging other people's spiritual journeys. Covering over brokenness, weakness, and failure. In Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, in the book, Peter Scazzaro says that the Bible does not spin the flaws of its heroes. That's the great thing about the Bible. You see the flaws of its heroes. Moses was a murderer. Doesn't cover that up. Hosea's wife was a prostitute. Jonah was a racist. Jacob was a liar. And John Mark deserted Paul. None of those flaws are spun. That's what I like about the Bible, that it shows the true people And I'm one of them. And all these people send the same message, that every human being on earth, regardless of their gifts and strengths, are weak, vulnerable, and dependent upon God and others. We are deeply flawed and broken. I'll tell you some of my story. On December 31st, 2010, it was the first time that I have ever spent New Year's Eve alone. First time in my life I was ever alone on New Year's Eve. So I decided I'd clean my closet first. What a great way to end the year, right? And that I would sit down and I would write down the most brutal realities of my life at that time. See, I'd read this book, Good to Great, which is a business book but has tremendous personal applications in life. And it says each one of us at some point must face the most brutal realities of our lives. So on December 31st, 2010, I sat down with my journal, and this is what I wrote. Tonight, the most brutal realities of my life are: my marriage of 28 years is over, and I accept my part of the blame. That means I'm facing some very challenging emotionally and financially times. So many things are deteriorating in my family, and I need to seriously address these issues. Because of my lack of focus for the past year, my performance at work has suffered gravely, and I was this close to losing my job. I was behind in my taxes. My house was in grave disrepair. I had a lot of work to do. My entire family, because of this dysfunction that was surrounding us, was in severe disarray, and I don't know where to start. But with God's help, I'll start anew tomorrow. That's what I wrote. Now, when I looked at that, I was like, that's not a good picture. But it was a turning point in my life. And I encourage it to you too. At some point in time, when you're going through a hard time, sit down and what's the most brutal realities today? It's an honest assessment of where I am. And the next day, January 1st, I began to work on myself. It's two things that motivate us to change. Right, Becky? What are those two things?
Inspiration and inspiration.
She listens to me. Not like my kids.
What were they?
Desperation and inspiration. You see, desperation is what I don't want to be, but it's a good starting point. But inspiration is what I want to become, and that brings you forward. At that time, I was broken, but the next day I began to walk in a new direction. And let me tell you something. I was tired, I was exhausted, trying to cover up my brokenness from the illusion of that my life was perfect. Look, my marriage wasn't perfect. My kids weren't perfect. I'm not perfect. Nothing was perfect, and I'm not in control. As terrible as that sounds, that was relieving to me. You see, in this one voice, we use a 12-step journey that brings us to what we call emotional sobriety and spiritual maturity. And the biggest step is step one. As that says, I'm powerless over what's going on around me. And because of my powerlessness and because of the circumstances, my life has become unmanageable. Now, as terrible as that sounds, it's a gigantic step to just let go of that and to express that. But you know what? That is freedom. Are you ready to acknowledge your brokenness? Maybe it's in your marriage. Maybe you're having struggles with family or finances. Maybe you have a prodigal child. Maybe it's just the unsteadiness of the world, right? That you feel broken about. But the way we manage our brokenness brings us to the end of our rope. You can't manage it any longer. Are we ready to admit that we are broken? Henry Cloud, in his book, Changes That Heal, he wrote, now listen to this. This is great stuff. Too many times our churches offer less comfort than an AA meeting. He notes that people won't admit their weaknesses and problems in church for fear of being labeled as weak or sinful. But at an AA meeting, anyone who does not admit their problem is labeled as in denial. And then he goes on to say in the book that the irony is that in our churches, people look better, but they get worse. While in an AA meeting, they look worse, but they get better because they're willing to admit their brokenness. There's great power in that. Let me quote you something that Matt Mayer put online the other day. I found this very interesting. The grace of God is given so that all mistakes can serve a purpose instead of serving shame. Listen to that. The grace of God serves a purpose. Our mistakes serve a purpose instead of serving shame. You see, grace turns a hurtful scar into a faithful story and a painful failure into a promising future. Listen, without that, we're wasting our time. We're posturing. We could be home having coffee and bagels, which, it doesn't even make any sense without that mindset that we are broken and we need to be fixed. Second thing is living without limits. Anybody here ever hear of Steve Earle? Okay, you people really need to be educated. You need to listen to my radio show. You'll know who Steve Earle is. Steve Earle is a great singer-songwriter, country singer-songwriter. And he's got this song that's covered by Joan Baez. It's called God is God. It's such a great song. And the first verse he ends with, I believe in God, and God ain't me. And the second verse he ends it, I believe in God, but God ain't us. And the third verse he ends it, I believe in God, and God is God. God is God, but God ain't us. See, as Christians, we've convinced ourselves that we are required to attend to everyone's needs. And we feel guilty or ashamed when we can't serve everyone. Peter Scazzaro writes, the core spiritual issue here relates to our limits and our humanity. We're not God. We can't serve everyone in need. We're human. Listen, even Jesus doesn't heal everyone. In Mark, the first chapter of Mark, it says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, he left the house, and he went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, hey, everyone's looking for you. And Jesus said, let us go somewhere else, to a nearby village, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come. So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. First, notice, Jesus gets away in solitude early in the morning. He understands being with the Father before doing for the Father. Self-care is not selfish. We're only following Jesus' example. The day before, he's casting out demons and he's healing the sick, right? And it says, people are amazed at his teaching. And the disciples are looking at a missed opportunity. Everybody's looking for you. Where are you? We got numbers, man. This is working. We're finally seeing this work. There's plenty more to heal. Look, we got plenty of people to heal. And Jesus says, let's go somewhere else. Somewhere else? Everybody's not healed. Work's not finished. We have momentum, Jesus. But our plan of success is not Jesus' plan. At another time, we see Jesus, he's healing people, he's teaching, and he feeds 5,000, and then he goes away to a mountain to pray. We all have limitations. It's not weakness. It's just limitations. I'd like to play basketball, but I'm not 6'8". There's nothing I can do about that. Paul Tripp, in his book, Lead, says in ministry, we all have to realize that we have limits, all of us, the pastoral staff included. We have limited gifts. Not everyone can sing. Listen, not everyone can sing, okay? Really. I mean, everybody says, well, it's a joyful noise. I think when we go to heaven, God's going to say, not so much. I don't know who told you that, but we weren't hearing that up here. We all have limited gifts. Not everybody can do everything. We all have limited time. 24 hours, right? That's about it. Anybody got more than 24 hours? Not really. You know, the average life expectancy is 78 to 80 years. When you break that down, it's about 29,000 days. I think about this stuff. And if that's accurate, I got about 5,100 days left. That's 14 Christmases. We are all going to die with unfinished projects and unrealized goals. I was watching Larry King one time, and he was interviewing Andy Williams. Anybody remember Andy Williams? Okay, great. Andy Williams was like the best, man. He was a handsome guy, great singer, and he was being interviewed by Larry King, and at the time, he was 82. I was looking at him, I was like, he looks great. He's 82, he looks better than me. He looks wonderful. Andy Williams, still singing. Oh, man, he's 82. Shortly after that, he died. We look great, right? He looked good. His time was limited too. You know, you ever have somebody say, hey, you know, if I had your time, you had my time. You don't get my time. We only have a certain amount of time. We are all limited in time. We all have limited energy. I have so much less energy than I have. My kids wore me out. I mean, it's just, I'm a white flag now. I don't have any energy, kids. You do whatever you want. Yeah, sure. Anybody here have teenagers? Who has teenagers? You come to that, right? It's just, okay, whatever, you know. And we all have limited maturity. Each of us has character weaknesses, character defects. We're all still in need of rescuing, convicting, transforming power of the gospel. Some of us are people pleasers. Some of us are procrastinators. Some of us lust, some envy, some have greed and selfishness. And we all need refreshment, body, soul, and spirit. We all need refreshment, body, soul, and spirit. That's why we practice Sabbath. That's why God gave it to us, to stop, to rest, to delight, and to contemplate. That's what the Sabbath day is all about. Abraham Joshua Heschel, in his book, The Sabbath. Boy, I would recommend you read this book. What a great book. It's written by this rabbi. And he says, 6 days a week, we wrestle with the world, wringing profit from the earth. But on the Sabbath, we especially care for the seed of eternity planted in our soul. In order to raise our lives, our relationships, and our faith to an elite level in this world, regular, consistent renewal is a must. Nobody shows up to play the violin and say, I'll just wing it. I don't need the notes, right? You've got to practice. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. We need that practice of refreshment. Again, in the book, he says, in the tempestuous ocean of time and toil, there are islands of stillness where man may enter a harbor and reclaim his dignity. The island is the seventh day, the Sabbath, a day of detachment from things, instruments, and practical affairs, as well as attachment to the Spirit. There are certain keystone practices in our lives. The Sabbath is a keystone practice, that one practice that everything in our life rests on. Lastly is judging other people's spiritual journey. We are good at this, aren't we? We are so good at judging other people's spiritual journeys, not looking at our own, but judging others. Because you know what? I'm right, and you're all going to hell. Not really. But we judge people for so many things, don't we? I mean, we judge the way they dress. Oh, he's a Christian, and he wears that. Okay, all right. Or the music they listen to. Oh, I thought you were a Christian. Or the movies they watch. A number of years ago, a friend asked me, do you ask me about another friend, you think he's saved? So I don't know. I don't, that's above my pay grade. I don't make that decision of who is. It's not up to me. We don't know. We don't know where people are. I had a friend that was a Catholic priest. And one of the things, those of you who grew up in the Catholic Church, okay, so lots. So one of the rules in the church is you don't leave church till the priest leaves. When he leaves, then you're free to go. You're dismissed when he leaves. And this guy, he was a Catholic priest, and he noticed that this one woman was sneaking out every single week, dodging out early, right? So he stood in the back one day where she left, and when she was walking out, he said, do you remember who left the Last Supper first? Referring to Judas. And she turned to him and she said, you know, Father, I know. My mother's at home and she's bedridden. And there's no one to take care of her but me. So I sneak away for a little while to come to Mass. But I have to leave early because I have to watch her. He said, I never judged anyone again after that. You don't know what's going on in people's lives. The church is filled with unfinished people, Paul Tripp says, with sins still resident in them in the midst of ongoing spiritual war. Do you know we're in a war? We are in a spiritual war. And, about 30-something years ago, I read this book by Watchman Nee. Love Not the World is the name of the book. It's a little thin book. It's not much. This book blew me away. And what he talks about is there is an agenda in the world always looking to capture our hearts and our minds, always nudging us away from the kingdom of God. And I thought, I agree with this. I agree with this book. But if I told any of my friends, they would think I was nuts. So I keep it to myself. But A.W. Tozer wrote a book once. This world is a battleground, not a playground. We all need everything that the church is intended to provide. We all need to be warned, encouraged, confronted, supported, and loved by a community of grace. We are all have our limits. We don't judge each other. The essence of emotionally healthy spirituality is that we grow individually as a community to love God in a way that we can love others well, that Christ taught us how to love. Now, I have three kinds of people in my life: plus, minus, and equal. I have people who are further up the road in life than me, are more mature than me, who can bring me along and raise my game. And I have people who are behind me on the road, who it's my job to help along and to support. And then I have people who are right where I am, who can stand beside me and walk with me, plus, minus, and equal. Those are the people you need in your life, plus, minus, and equal. Look, no one's better and no one is worse. We're just all on different spots on the road. Now, I'll give you the takeaway. My wife and I, whenever we leave church, wherever we go to church, whenever we are away, we go to another church, and we always leave, well, what's the takeaway? And sometimes my takeaway is just, did you see that guy eat 2 donuts? I mean, really, you're only supposed to take one, right? But I'm going to give you the takeaways this morning. Number one, we are all deeply flawed and broken. There are no exceptions. No exceptions. We're going to focus on that on Holy Week. Growing up, my mom would not eat meat on Fridays, right? And I would say to her, Kenny's a Christian. I mean, he's having a hot dog tonight. I mean, why can't I have a hot dog? Is it really? Do we she says, I just want you to be reminded of what happened on a Friday. That's why we don't eat meat. Wow. To cover up our brokenness is futile and exhausting, isn't it? And we all have limitations. It's not weakness. We can't do everything. Jesus doesn't expect us to do everything, just what he asks us to do. And lastly, we have no right judging other people's spiritual journey. My mother always used to say, they're just people, Terence. Don't be so quick to judge them. You don't know where they're coming from. And I'll leave you this quote that I gave you in the beginning because I love this quote. People may forget what you say, and people may forget what you do, but no one will ever forget how you made them feel. No one will ever forget how you made them feel. God bless you. Thank you so much.